I've seen a lot in my 20 years as a correctional officer, more than most people see in 10 lifetimes. I've seen full-scale riots that turned cell blocks into something out of a medieval battlefield, where the air was thick with smoke and the screams of men. I've conducted shakedowns that uncovered weapons so viciously ingenious they'd make an engineer blush, sharpened toothbrushes that could puncture a lung, shivs crafted from melted plastic and a stolen light fixture. I've seen the whole 9 yards of human misery and depravity. Over time, you build a callus over your soul. You get used to the noise, the constant, deafening roar of hundreds of men packed together, shouting, fighting, living lives of loud desperation. You get used to the simmering violence that hangs in the air like humidity before a thunderstorm. But there's one sound that cut through all of that, one sound I'll never, ever forget: silence. It wasn't the quiet of an empty yard after lockdown. It was the dead, absolute, vacuum-sealed silence that fell over the B-block visiting room when an inmate's mother, a woman who looked like she belonged at a country club, said a single casual sentence. It was a sentence so seemingly harmless that 99% of the people in that room didn't even register it. But it was aimed like a rifle, and it hit its target dead center. That target was our deputy warden, a man who faced down murderers without so much as flinching, a man who I once saw stare into the eyes of a 300-pound lifer holding a razor blade to a guard's throat and talk him down with a voice as calm as a summer evening. In that moment, I saw this titan of authority turn white as a ghost. His hand, a hand I'd only ever seen as steady as granite, started to tremble, a faint but undeniable tremor that he tried to hide by clenching it into a fist. In that one silent moment, with the background hum of crying children and whispered arguments suddenly gone, I knew this wasn't just another dysfunctional family drama unfolding on a Sunday afternoon. This was the loose thread of a conspiracy, and someone had just given it a hard, deliberate pull. A pull that was about to unravel the entire prison I thought I knew and threaten every single person inside it, starting with me. Before that day, my world had a certain rhythm, a brutal but predictable tempo. Predictable, if you can call life inside a maximum security penitentiary predictable. The name's Mac, or at least that's what you can call me. For 2 decades, Northwood Correctional Facility was my home away from home, a sprawling city of concrete and steel, filled with society's worst nightmares and guarded by men and women like me who became fluent in the language of controlled chaos. Northwood isn't a place you read about in tourist guides, it's a place you have nightmares about. It's a level 4 maximum security facility, a concrete dumping ground for the most violent, the most unstable, and the lifers who have absolutely nothing left to lose. The air inside is a physical presence, heavy with the acrid smell of industrial cleaner fighting a losing battle against sweat, cheap food, and a kind of deep-bone despair that seeps right into your marrow. My job, as I saw it, wasn't just locking and unlocking doors or breaking up fights. It was to watch, to listen, to understand the subtle, invisible currents that flowed beneath the surface of the daily routine. You learn to read the yard like a weatherman reads the sky, interpreting the subtle signs. You know a storm's coming by the way the rival factions stop talking to each other, by the sudden, unnatural quiet that descends upon the Chow Hall, a silence far more terrifying than the usual roar. My philosophy was simple and it kept me alive for 20 years. See everything, hear everything, assume nothing. And above all else, never, ever get complacent. The day you think you've seen it all is the day they carry you out on a gurney. The man whose job it was to keep that storm from ever hitting landfall was Deputy Warden Hayes. If you built a deputy warden from a mail order kit, you'd get a perfect replica of Hayes. He was in his late 50s, with a ramrod-straight posture drilled into him by the Marine Corps and a face that looked like it had been carved from a block of seasoned oak. He walked the tiers with an aura of unshakable authority. I've seen inmates who would charge a line of riot-geared COs without a second thought part like the Red Sea when Hayes walked through their block. He wasn't liked, not by the staff he rode relentlessly nor by the inmates he ruled over. But he was respected, feared, even. Hayes didn't bend the rules. He didn't interpret the rules. He was the system, personified in a crisp uniform, unyielding, absolute, and seemingly incorruptible. I'd seen him stare down a shank-wielding inmate who was high on homemade hooch and foaming at the mouth, and talk the weapon out of his hand without even raising his voice. The man seemed utterly incapable of fear. That image of him was so fixed in my mind, so fundamental to the order of my world, that it made what happened later feel like watching gravity suddenly fail. And then there was inmate Thomas Miller, prisoner number 77519. In a facility overflowing with horror stories written in muscle and scar tissue, Miller was an anomaly, a phantom. He wasn't a gangbanger covered in ink or a street tough with a chip on his shoulder. He was a former financial analyst, a clean-cut, white-collar guy whose jacket said he got tangled up in a massive fraud case that spiraled into unexpected violence. He was doing 25 to life and seemed determined to serve every single day of it as quietly as possible. Unlike most new arrivals who quickly crew up for protection, Miller was a ghost. He kept to himself, worked his menial job in the prison laundry, and read dense novels in his cell. He was polite, almost unnervingly so. He'd make brief eye contact, give a quiet, respectful officer, and then move on. In the violent, testosterone-fueled ecosystem of Northwood, his quiet intelligence was its own kind of armor, a cloak of invisibility. He was a model inmate, the kind you almost forget is there, the kind you give the worst jobs to because you know he'll never complain. His daily routine was so rigid it was almost bizarre. Wake up, breakfast, work in the steamy heat of the laundry, lunch, count, an hour of walking the track alone in the yard, dinner, count, lockdown, read until the lights went out at 11. Every single day, without deviation. For the longest time, I figured he was just a guy trying to do his time and disappear into the walls. I had no idea he was the centerpiece of the whole damn thing. The visiting room at Northwood is a special kind of purgatory. It's a big, echoey hall painted a shade of institutional beige that's supposed to be soothing but just makes everything feel more tense and hopeless. It's a place of forced smiles and whispered fights, where families try to pretend they're just catching up over bad vending machine coffee and not separated by a chasm of bad choices, violence, and time. The air hums with the sound of children crying because they can't understand why they can't hug their daddy, and the low, urgent murmur of people trying to cram a life's worth of conversation into a monitored 2-hour window. Our job in there is to be living statues, watching everything, absorbing the palpable waves of grief and anger, and stepping in only when we absolutely have to. I'd seen Thomas Miller's mother, Eleanor, on her bi-weekly visits for years. And every single time, she seemed completely and utterly out of place, like a diamond displayed in a pawn shop. Other visitors wore jeans and old sweatshirts, looking weary and worn down by life. Eleanor showed up dressed for a corporate board meeting. She favored perfectly tailored pantsuits in shades of charcoal and navy, discreet but obviously expensive jewelry, and a haircut that probably cost more than my weekly paycheck. She radiated a kind of cold, calculated elegance that was more intimidating than any gang tattoo. There were never any tears, no desperate hugs across the Formica table. Their whole interaction was stiff, formal, and bizarrely professional. She didn't look like a heartbroken mother visiting her incarcerated son. She looked like a CEO conducting a quarterly performance review with an underperforming subordinate. She would talk at him in a steady, low monologue, her hands resting calmly on her designer handbag, while Thomas just sat there, his shoulders hunched, staring at his own hands on the table. He'd nod once in a while, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. He rarely spoke. It was a bizarre ritual I had witnessed dozens of times. I'd always written it off as just another twisted family dynamic in a building full of them. It was strange, but in a prison filled with strange, it was just background noise. The other inmates and their families must have felt her cold vibe, too. The tables immediately surrounding the Millers were always the last to fill up, as if she projected an invisible force field of ice. People just subconsciously kept their distance. Then came that one Sunday. It was a blisteringly hot afternoon in late July, the kind where the air is thick and wet, and the overworked air conditioning units were just pushing the stale, hot air around. Deputy Warden Hayes was doing one of his surprise walk-throughs, a classic power move designed to keep us on our toes and remind the inmates exactly who was the boss of this world. He moved with his usual brisk, purposeful authority, his sharp eyes scanning every corner of the room, missing nothing. I was standing at my post near the vending machines, maybe 15 feet from the Miller's table. Eleanor was in the middle of one of her quiet, one-sided lectures. Thomas was in his usual passive, disconnected state. As Hayes got closer, moving down the aisle, Eleanor's rhythm didn't change. But her eyes, as cold and hard as chips of ice, flickered up from her son and met mine for a fraction of a second. Then they shifted, just for a moment, to the approaching deputy warden. A thin, sharp, predatory smile touched her lips. She paused her monologue, leaned forward just an inch, and raised her voice just enough to cut cleanly through the din of the room. It wasn't a shout, not even close. It was a clear, conversational tone, aimed at me but timed with surgical precision for Hayes to overhear as he passed. "Officer," she said, her voice as smooth as polished silk, "you should really tell the warden to be more careful on his weekend fishing trips. The weather up at Stone Creek can turn so suddenly, can't it?" The words just hung there in the thick, heavy air. To anyone else, it was meaningless, polite chatter. But I was watching Hayes. The second the words Stone Creek hit his ears, he stopped dead in his tracks. His whole body went rigid. The color drained from his face, leaving a sick, gray pallor under his tan. I saw his right hand, the one he always kept loose and ready, clench into a white-knuckled fist at his side. And then I saw it, a slight, almost invisible tremor that ran through his fingers. He swallowed, hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He tried to cover the freeze, to turn it into a casual pause. He gave a tight, forced nod in our general direction and then turned on his heel, walking away just a little too fast, his confident stride now clipped and urgent. He didn't finish his tour of the room. He walked straight out of the visiting hall and didn't look back. I was left standing there, my own blood running cold. The noise of the room rushed back in, but all I could hear was the echo of Eleanor Miller's voice. I looked at her. She was already back to talking to her son in that same low monotone, her expression as blank and emotionless as a porcelain doll's. But I'd seen it. I'd seen the flash of triumph in her eyes. I'd seen a predator test its leash, and I'd seen the leash jerk hard. I had just watched a casual, meaningless remark bring a man like Deputy Warden Hayes to the verge of visible panic. And I knew, with a bone-deep certainty that settled deep in my gut, that Stone Creek wasn't just a place. It was a weapon. And she had just shown me she knew exactly how to use it. Stone Creek. It wasn't a fishing spot. It was another goddamn prison. My blood turned to ice. The news articles about his death were surprisingly thin, suspiciously so for such a high-profile case. It was all too neat, too tidy. A key federal witness dying from natural causes just weeks before his testimony? That should have triggered a massive internal investigation. Instead, the paper trail was clean, quiet, and quickly sealed. Using my login credentials at Northwood, I did something incredibly risky. I dove into the interfacility transfer records, a place I had no business being. And there it was, in crisp black and white. Deputy Warden Hayes had personally reviewed and signed the order to transfer Martin Garris to Stone Creek Penitentiary 6 weeks before his death. The official reason cited on the form was specialized medical needs, but a quick, panicked search of Garris's file showed a man with no history of heart problems whatsoever. It was a lie, sanitized and legitimized by a signature. Hayes had delivered the government's star witness to a prison where he conveniently died. This was way past a weird visit. This was dark. But I still didn't understand how Thomas Miller, the quiet bookworm, fit into this deadly equation. I turned from paper to people, to the prison grapevine, the most dangerous and unreliable source of information there is. You can't ask direct questions. That's how you get found with a shiv in your back. So I went to my best source, an old lifer named Pops, who'd been inside for 40 years and ran the prison library as his own personal kingdom. We had a quiet understanding. One afternoon, while browsing the stacks, I casually mentioned the old Stone Creek facility, saying I'd heard it was a rough place to do time. Pops didn't even look up from the cracked spine of the book he was carefully repairing. "Some places are rougher than others, Mac," he rasped, his voice like sandpaper. "Depends on who you are and who you ain't." I pushed a little, leaning against a bookshelf. "Ever hear of a guy they held there? A lawyer named Garris." His hands stilled. He slowly looked up, his old eyes, roomy but still razor-sharp, fixing on mine. "Names are dangerous things in here. Best to forget 'em before they get you forgot." He was about to clam up, to retreat back into his shell. But I held his gaze. I'd done him a few solids over the years, looked the other way on some minor infractions. He owed me. He let out a long, weary sigh. "All I ever heard," he whispered, his voice dropping so low I had to lean in to hear, "is that some people don't die. They just get relocated. And some relocations are colder and deeper than the ground." He paused, then added the final, crucial piece. "Right after that Garris fellow went away, your quiet boy, Miller, got himself a nice little promotion. Went from scrubbing floors in the laundry to being king of the books right here. Funny, ain't it? How one man's tragedy is another man's promotion. A promotion. To the library. Access to information, to computers, to the very heart of the prison's internal network. It was a critical piece. Miller wasn't just a quiet inmate, he was an asset, placed in a strategic position. Suddenly, I started seeing everything differently. The countless small privileges Miller got that I'd never questioned before. A known bully who'd been leaning on him for commissary was suddenly transferred to another block after a single undocumented complaint, a move that needed a sign-off from high up. I started noticing that during Eleanor's Sunday visits, the C-block guard rotation was always staffed by the same handful of Hayes's guys, officers who'd mysteriously gotten promotions or favorable shifts thanks to the deputy warden. It was all subtle, deniable. Hayes would just suggest to the shift captain, "Hey, why don't you put Johnson on C-block today, give Thompson the day off?" And the captain, wanting to stay on Hayes's good side, would do it without a second thought. A protective bubble had been formed around Thomas Miller, woven from favors and fear. I knew I was getting too close. One evening, the phone in my station rang. It was Hayes's secretary. He wanted to see me. In his office, he was paternal, almost kind, which was 1,000 times more terrifying than if he'd been yelling. "Mac," he started, motioning to the leather chair opposite his imposing desk. "You're one of my best officers. 20 years. Clean record. You know as well as I do that it's a good idea to focus on your job. The day-to-day. Don't go looking for problems that aren't there. It can complicate things for a man." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You have a family. A pension to think about. 20 years is a long time to build something up. It would be a shame to see it all come crashing down over a misunderstanding." It was a threat, wrapped in the guise of fatherly advice. He never said Miller's name. He never said Stone Creek. He didn't have to. I saw the same fear in his eyes I'd seen in the visiting room, but now it was welded to a chilling, cold resolve. He was a trapped animal, and as every CO knows, a trapped animal is the most dangerous one in the zoo. I walked out of that office with my heart pounding a hole in my chest. Hayes knew that I knew something. I was no longer the hunter. I was the hunted. I was in over my head, caught between a corrupt official with absolute power over my life and a ruthless syndicate that made people disappear. If you've ever been in a situation where turning back is just as dangerous as moving forward, you know exactly where I was. Standing in the quiet, sterile hallway of a prison that was about to become my own personal cage. Walking away from Hayes's office, I felt a new kind of fear. Not the hot adrenaline of a prison riot, but the cold, creeping dread of being hunted. His beautifully veiled warning did the opposite of what he intended. He didn't scare me off. He confirmed that I was standing right on top of the truth. Now, I didn't just want to know what was going on. I needed the proof for my own survival. My problem was that I had nothing but coincidences and rumors, a chain of whispers and shadows. I searched for Stone Creek Lodge online from the library and found it, an exclusive, remote retreat for the ultra-rich, specializing in fly fishing and privacy. There was no public record connecting Deputy Warden Hayes to the place. I was missing the blackmail, the key that connected Hayes's abject fear to Eleanor Miller's quiet, confident power. The breakthrough came from the smallest possible break in routine. It came from Thomas Miller himself. It was late, and I was doing my evening rounds on C-block. Miller was in his cell, reading under his small lamp, same as always. But as I passed, my eyes, now trained to see the out-of-place, caught it. A thick, heavy tome on state geography was pushed into his small shelf at an angle, its spine not flush with the others. For a man this obsessively meticulous, a man whose few possessions were always arranged with geometric precision, that was either a sloppy mistake or a deliberate signal. I was betting my life it was a signal. Later that night, in the deep, profound quiet of the 3 a.m. shift when the prison is truly asleep, I used my master key to let myself into Miller's empty cell while he was on his overnight cleaning detail in another wing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. Was I chasing shadows? Was I about to throw away my career over a crooked book? I went straight to the shelf. I pulled the heavy geography book out. Tucked carefully between the pages detailing the state's northern river systems was a small, folded piece of paper. It was a map. A crude, hand-drawn map of a rural area, showing a river, a winding dirt road, and a small square marked simply, Cabin. Near the top of the page were the words, Stone Creek Fishing Lodge. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would break them. This was it. This was the connection. Beneath the map was a series of 6 dates, written in Miller's precise, analytical handwriting, arranged in a neat column. I snapped a quick, clear photo of the map and the dates with a cheap burner phone I kept for emergencies, folded the paper exactly as I'd found it, tucked it back into the book, and got the hell out of there. In the relative safety of a deserted guard station, I pulled up the dates from the prison's digital archives, my fingers trembling over the keyboard. My blood ran cold as the dots didn't just connect, they formed a perfect, horrifying constellation. The first date, June 14th, 2 years ago. The day Martin Garris died of a heart attack at Stone Creek Penitentiary. The second date, September 8th, last year. The day a rival gang leader, a major thorn in the side of Garris's old syndicate, was stabbed to death in the yard during a contrived distraction. The incident was ruled as generic gang violence. The killer was never found. The third date, February 22nd of this year. The day a huge shipment of seized contraband, drugs and weapons that could have been used as evidence in another case, went missing from the central evidence locker. The incident was blamed on a procedural error and a lazy inventory clerk. The case was quietly closed. Each date matched a significant event that benefited the syndicate, and each event had been officially written off by the prison administration as a coincidence, an accident, or an unsolvable crime. And then it all clicked into place. The whole sick, brilliant, terrifying picture. Eleanor Miller wasn't just a doting mother. She was the acting head of the syndicate, running her criminal empire from a plastic chair in a prison visiting room. Thomas Miller wasn't her victim. He was her inside man, her intelligence officer. His model inmate persona was the perfect cover. From his privileged perch in the library, he could gather information, identify targets, coordinate logistics, and pass messages. He was a spider in the center of a vast web that stretched far beyond Northwood's walls. And Hayes. Hayes was the linchpin. He wasn't a partner. He was their asset. That fishing trip to the Stone Creek Lodge wasn't a vacation. It was the scene of the crime. I don't know what they had on him. A gambling debt, a woman, something far darker that happened at that remote cabin on the map, but it was enough for Eleanor Miller to have absolute, undeniable control. Stone Creek was the name of his cage, and she rattled the bars every time she said it. His role was surgical. He couldn't order an inmate killed, but he could approve a transfer to a block controlled by that inmate's sworn enemies. He couldn't make a box of evidence disappear, but he could assign an officer he controlled to log it, knowing it never would be. He manipulated the vast, sluggish bureaucracy of the prison system with 1,000 tiny, deniable actions, all orchestrated by a cold, elegant woman in a pantsuit and her quiet, unassuming son. Northwood wasn't just a prison. It was a branch office for the mob. I held the truth in my hand, a blurry photo on a cheap phone screen. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It was the key to everything, and I knew it was also my death sentence. What could I possibly do? Walk into the warden's office? For all I knew, the warden was in on it, too, or on some other syndicate's payroll. It would be my word, the word of a line-level CO, against his decorated deputy warden. Hayes would bury me. He'd fabricate an incident report, plant a bag of drugs in my locker, and have me fired, discredited, and possibly charged before I could finish my story. For a week, I was a ghost. I did my job on autopilot, the weight of it all pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I watched Hayes as he walked the tiers, moving with his usual artificial confidence, but I could see the cracks in his facade now, the flicker of fear in his eyes whenever he saw me. I watched Miller in the library, the quiet inmate who was anything but, and wondered if he knew. I was standing in the center of their web, and I knew they could feel the vibrations of my presence. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. I sat at my kitchen table, night after night, the single light burning, piecing it all together. I made copies of everything: Miller's visitor logs, Garris's falsified transfer order, the official report on his heart attack. I wrote out a detailed timeline of every coincidence, meticulously cross-referencing every date from Miller's map with official prison records. I printed the grainy photo of the map. It was a mountain of circumstantial evidence, but when you put it all together, it told a story that was impossible to ignore. Finally, I made my decision. I couldn't fight this system from the inside. I had to go nuclear. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in years. I got in my truck and I started driving. 4 hours east, toward the state capitol, toward a sterile, imposing government building you never want a reason to visit. I found the directory in the lobby. Office of the Inspector General, Department of Corrections. Walking into that office, I felt like a traitor and a madman all at once. I was breaking the deepest code of my profession, the code of silence. A stern-looking investigator in a bland suit listened to my story without a single change in his expression, his face a perfect poker mask. I laid it all out, the timeline, the documents, the veiled threats from Hayes, and finally, the grainy photo of the map. I talked for 2 hours straight, the words pouring out of me. When I was done, a heavy, profound silence filled the room. I had taken my leap of faith. Now, all I could do was wait to see if I'd land on my feet or just keep falling into the darkness. The movies always get it wrong. There were no immediate, dramatic arrests. There was no triumphant press conference. I drove home in a daze, went back to work the next day, and waited. It was the most nerve-wracking, agonizing period of my entire life. The normal rhythm of Northwood returned, but for me, the air was charged with a screaming silence. I could feel Hayes's eyes on me constantly. His expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed mask of authority, but I knew he was watching. He knew I'd done something. We were 2 actors on a stage, both knowing the final act was coming, waiting for the curtain to fall. Every time I saw Miller through the glass of the library, my stomach twisted into a knot. Had he noticed the book was moved? Had he told his mother I was in his cell? Was I a marked man, just waiting for a blade in a crowded hallway? Then, 3 weeks after my trip to the Capitol, the storm arrived. Not with blaring sirens and flashing lights, but as a silent, ominous fleet of 5 black sedans that rolled through the front gate just after sunrise. Men and women in dark, severe suits, carrying briefcases, walked into the administration building with grim purpose. They were state investigators. The prison went into a quiet, unofficial lockdown, a wave of tension rippling through the staff and inmates alike. I was in the control bubble for C Block when I saw them walk down the hallway to the deputy warden's wing. 10 minutes later, they walked out, with Hayes between them. He wasn't in handcuffs. He was just a man in a suit, his head held high out of pure, stubborn pride, but his shoulders were slumped in utter defeat. As he passed under the fluorescent lights, he looked smaller, diminished, all the terrifying power he once held stripped away. He was escorted to one of the sedans, the car door closed, and he was driven away. He never came back. The next night, under the cover of darkness and with no official paperwork, Thomas Miller was transferred. He just vanished from the system. We heard rumors later that he'd been moved to a federal supermax facility, a concrete box so deep that his influence, and his mother's reach, would be reduced to 0. A week after that, I saw a small news brief online, buried on page 6 of the digital state paper. Eleanor Miller had been arrested. A sweeping federal indictment charged her and a dozen other high-ranking syndicate members with racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, and a host of other charges. The article briefly mentioned that the suspicious death of a key witness, Martin Garris, was a central part of the government's case. Northwood slowly, cautiously, went back to something resembling normal. A new deputy warden came in, a man who actually smiled sometimes, and the network of Hayes's guys were all quietly reassigned to dead-end posts or encouraged to take early retirement. Among the inmates, the story was just that Hayes finally got caught with his hand in the till, skimming money from prison contracts. No one ever knew the real truth about the quiet inmate, his elegant mother, and the fishing trip that brought a powerful man to his knees. I stayed on for another 2 years, but it was never the same. I couldn't look at the visiting room without hearing Eleanor Miller's silky, weaponized voice. I couldn't walk past the library without picturing the map hidden in the book. I had learned that the real danger, the real, soul-deep corruption, doesn't always carry a shiv. Sometimes it walks right through the front gate, dressed in a designer pantsuit, and holds the whole system hostage with a whisper. I learned that the real bars aren't always made of steel. Sometimes, they're forged from secrets. They cleaned house at Northwood, but it always made me wonder, How many other Deputy Warden Hazes are out there, trapped in their own invisible cages? How many other prisons are really being run, not by the state, but by the casual taunts and hidden threats of someone in the visiting room? Let me know what you think in the comments.